Okay, so the recording's in progress. That was an announcement. Just as a reminder, the discussions that we have here are for the Legends of Real Estate, so for the agents of the Legends of Real Estate. If someone comes upon this video on YouTube and is not a member of the Legends of Real Estate, please acknowledge or realize that any discussions that take place here are specific to the agents for the Legends of Real Estate and our policies and procedures. If you have policies and procedures that are different at your brokerage and you've stumbled upon this recording, we respect those, but please know that the information here is for and designed for the Legends of Real Estate agents. So that being said, I'm going to go ahead back and share my screen. All right. Any general questions we want to make sure that we get covered as I go through some of the steps in AppFiles and where to find things, and any general questions we want to make sure get answered? I just want to make a note of those.
Yes, I have a question.
Okay.
When setting up the master template in an app file for a customer, when those fields pre-populate on forms, sometimes information may or may not come from that master template. So while you may think, oh, the full address populated over when you went to a specific form that had the property address, but maybe it left off the zip code. I just would like to know if maybe I'm doing something on my end in that template, or if there's a way to make sure that information does come over, or I don't know. Any thoughts about that would be great.
Okay. Are you using auto-populate?
No, it's if I fill out the master template and I create a package, sometimes um, information about the customer's name and address, sometimes it might leave off a last name, sometimes it might leave off a zip code in some of those
All right.
forms. So I just go ahead.
When I get into when we get into the file, I'll show you the best way. I mean, if you're starting with a package, it should work
Yes.
out. But there's also fields. The fields are separated, and sometimes people are putting too many names into one field. So let me see if I can work through some of
Yes.
those and see if we might have a difference in how we're doing things, and then
I
you can
think,
stop me
yes.
when.
I do believe, I think what you just said, I think if you have um multiple names or something in those fields and it might get confused. But anyway, it's okay. I just wanted to make sure because that has happened to me a couple times and I have submitted the forms. I'm like, oh shoot, it's missing that. So I have to go back. But anyway, and I typically look at all that, but sometimes it, things fall through the cracks. But
Stuff is
thank
easy to get missed.
yes.
Yeah, stop me when we get to that point if I'm at a place where it's not making sense. So, or where you're seeing the issues. Okay.
Yeah.
And general questions on files processes that we want to make sure get covered. Okay. So as we go along, please don't hesitate to stop me and see if there, if a question comes up. I will try to watch. If you can raise your hand, sometimes I can see that a little better. I'm not able to monitor the chat as easily when sharing a screen. So please don't hesitate just to speak up and stop me. So just to kind of refresh, AppFiles is our back office system that allows you to put together listings and purchase and sale agreements, to use forms in the process of creating contracts and or listing agreements, also a contract. Um, and it's got everything in it. The reason we're really pushing for an introduction into or the use of AppFiles is because with AppFiles, um, we are assured that we have the most recent up-to-date forms. So it becomes very important that we're able to utilize AppFiles with the most recent and up-to-date forms. We change the packages. We make sure that the AppFiles works with us to make sure that the most recent and current forms are available to you. So, and when we make changes to the packages or when we have forms that are in packages, replaces the old forms with the new forms. So again, as we go through all of these changes and all of these updates, it becomes so important that we're using the most up-to-date forms because we're constantly getting information about how the forms are to be used. I mean, we just had a long discussion yesterday with another broker about how FF and GG are being used and what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. And Joanna Watkins was just in about a week and a half ago, so there were questions about how those forms are used as well as how other forms are used. So we're trying to keep you up to date on the forms and what makes the most sense and what we would like to see you using. So keep watching for those emails. But just to kind of set aside how we get into AppFiles, remember AppFiles, it's appfiles.com. So this is the actual website that you want to go to, appfiles.com. And then use your login here button, and that will take you to your main screen once you've logged in. There's lots of information in the middle. If there's tasks that you or you and I are working on, you'll probably see those in the middle here first, and then there's going to be activity that's going on. Activity that shows in the recent activity will be anything that where someone has done something with a file that is shared by everybody. So certain files we have that are shared by everybody, like our seller consult, buyer consult, and we're working on updating both of those. But there are other files that are shared with everybody. The company file that has things like the W-9 in it, that would be a shared file. So when someone makes a change to that file, that information should come up on recent activity so that you can see what is being used. The calendar is on the right, over on the right-hand side. So if you're looking for any of the training sessions or any of the forums, they should all be on the right-hand side, including if we're offering them via Zoom, the Zoom link. If you use your calendar here on the top tab, the far right tab, that'll also visually lay out the calendar for you. In other words, things that are going on in our offices or things that would be going on that you may want to participate in. Those are all available on the calendar. In the upper left-hand corner, you'll see hopefully your picture if you've uploaded one. If not, feel free to by using my photo. Let me go ahead and enlarge this a little bit so that, not so you can see me, but more so you can see the words. So that's what you'll see under here. You can upload your photo. Settings would be your settings related to how you get into your platform and also any setups for your platform. So the restrictions and notifications, we usually manage most of those. Your security actions would be related to obviously your password and logging in, logging out from AppFiles. And then of course your user details. These will be the items that display or that you have access to add to your forms or that will automatically populate on your forms. Which brings me to the next piece, which is form values. If you haven't had a chance, and I know this is things like anytime you start a new program or anytime you're accessing a new program, whether it's CRM or it's something like this, a back system, or any other platform that you're using, you have to in a little bit of time. We can help you manage through the steps as you forward in using the program. However, there are certain things that you may want to take some time to actually do. And the form values is a great place to set your forms up so that whenever you have that form or whenever you bring that form up in your either packages or when you add that form to your transaction, it's already populated with certain information related to you. For example, in the coming soon, I've already typed in the legends of real estate. So now whenever I use this form, the legends of real estate will always be populated in the broker. Why? Well, I work with the legends of real estate. I'm using the coming soon file. That means it would be a listing with the legends of real estate. So having the broker name in there is going to be consistent for me. So when I customize this form to have the legends of real estate in here, it's always going to have that in there. I'm not going to have to retype it whenever I bring that form up. You scroll down through the form, you can see signatures, of course, would not be available to auto-populate. Those would have to be done because you have to see them when they occur and be dated and be stamped with the IP address of the computer that was used to put that signature in. However, I can scroll down to any form within the system and fill in information so that whenever that form comes up, then that form contains information. So if I came down here to the as-is residential contract for sale and purchase, of course, none of this information would customarily be consistent from transaction to transaction. But if I come all the way down to the last couple of pages where there's some specific information, if I'm using an as-is residential contract for sale and purchase, chances are I'm on the buy side, so I'm working with the buyer. And what I can do is actually fill in my information here so that this form will always have my information in there. So by using form values, I can go to different forms that I would consistently use, put my information in there, and then that information will always remain and will be consistent even as we move through new forms. So it's a way to try and facilitate the process and make things a little easier for you so you don't always have to retype your name or the brokerage name or something that's fairly consistent from transaction to transaction. So these are form values. This is in the upper left-hand corner, last option, form values. You can set certain values in any form that exists on the platform so that you don't have to retype it each and every time. Make sense? Any questions on that? The profile, the photo, your settings, form values? Yes.
So in the form values, it's only open the form, type our name, for example, or the Legends of Real Estate, and save, and that is going to be there.
You don't even have to save it, you just close it. The system, it's a really good point, thank you. The system automatically saves information, so you won't always have a save button. Usually you only have a save button when an additional window pops up. Otherwise, when you go through a package and you start filling in information, the system is automatically saving the information as you put the information in. So when you're in form values, for example, if I went into form values and I chose the residential listing agreement instead of the as is, so the residential contract for sale and purchase, not listing agreement, excuse me. And I came down to the last pages to put my information in here. I scroll all the way down. Sorry, I don't want to get by 6. I don't want to go too fast. I can put my information in here. There is no save button because the system is saving as I go. So all I have to do is come back up here and close this, and it will have saved that information. So that in that case, there would not be an additional save button. Again, save buttons usually appear when there's an additional window that pops up. So for long or detailed information that may be needed on a listing agreement or on a purchase and sale agreement, customarily things like personal property, legal descriptions, those kinds of things, another window will pop up. Additional terms and conditions, another window will pop up. You'll type into that, and there is a save button in the lower right-hand corner. It's a great distinction. Thank you. Any other questions about those 3 pieces right here? Okay. There's a variety of different ways that you can create a new app file. You can do it right here on the left-hand side. You can do it up here for a new app file. There are some options below the create new app file, things like print blank forms. So if you would like to print a form to review it, to fill in ahead of time, we don't recommend coming here to get forms to include in a package. You should do that all within your app file folder. So terminology is always weird. So this is an app file program. Each transaction contains a folder. The folder would either be a buyer folder or a seller folder. So buyer for buying, seller for listing. So you have those 2 folders, and then information is contained within the folder. We don't usually recommend that you just come here to print forms, fill something out, and then try and put it in your folder. If you create it within your folder, it will create a history so that you can see how the form is going back and forth, and that way it makes it easier also to send out. But you may have a need to print a form. Someone who may not be as computer savvy or does not like to do electronic signature. Even still, I would create the folder through, excuse me, create the documents and forms through your folder. But if there is a reason to print one out, you can come right into print documents. You can choose a document that you would like to print. You can say exclusive buyer broker. So here's my exclusive buyer brokerage agreement, no relationship, single agency transition. And then I have to scroll down to the exclusive buyer broker for transaction broker. If I bring that up, I can download that or print it. We'll take it to the same place. I can clear values if I put values in here. In other words, started to fill in the information, or I can save it to an app file so I can move it right to one of my app file folders if I would like to. But it's a way to actually get forms if you would like to review the forms. I can upload files. In other words, I can upload documents from outside of the system. I can scan the document. Probably recommend using either your phone to create a PDF to scan. The other nice thing about the system is most of the, well, all of the forms that it saves within your folder, in your transaction folder, would be PDFs. Does it take pictures? It still takes pictures, you know, JPEGs and PNGs. It takes those. It will hold them in your folder if they came as an email or if you moved it into your folder. But it can also transfer those different formats into a PDF for you so that you can work with it more readily in your folder. You can search your app files. Oh, I'm sorry. You can create tasks or appointments within the platform. Is it a CRM? No, it's not a CRM. The calendar program isn't fantastic at sending you reminders or creating appointments that you would want to develop within a CRM type of environment. And it doesn't do any type of drip campaigns or any type of specific marketing. So this is really designed for your creation of documents related to purchases and creation of documents related to listings. You can set up tasks attached to a specific transaction. So if you want reminders, this will send you reminders when you set up a task. So you could set up a task. For example, I could set up a task here. Maybe, there we go. And you'll see I can attach the task to a specific app file. In other words, a transaction that's already started. I can title the task in whatever format I want, provide details. I can assign it to myself. I can identify the date that it's due, what the priority is, and then I can tell the system how often I want to be reminded to complete this task. So this can be a way to set yourself up with reminders related to a specific transaction, or if you have general tasks that you want to complete. But it really is not a CRM to manage your contacts. You have your app files over on the left-hand side, so I can search for an app file. I can search for a specific transaction. I can view all of my app files. Since I'm looking at our entire database, it's a little bit larger. Yours is probably a little bit smaller in number. I can identify where my signature requests are. I can trash certain things. Please don't trash any transaction where anything has occurred. If you have a transaction, either a listing that never comes to fruition, we really don't recommend trashing that either, because that can be a history for you to also see who was involved or what was involved in your listing and maybe why it didn't come to fruition for you. And you may have another opportunity either with them or with that property. Trashing should really only be when you're practicing. You can practice in here, you can play in here, you can create false or ideal listings or ideal transactions for sale to practice, moving documents around, to practice uploading documents. You can do all that in here. Please do not trash things. You want to keep your folder as robust as possible. Yes, ma'am.
if you want to trash a file, you need to first go into the file, or you have to do that outside of the file.
You should do it inside of the file, but
Inside.
again, please don't trash anything that you've done any work on,
Mm-hmm.
unless it was something that you practice on. Like, I want to practice doing a listing. I want to see all the different forms. I want to fill out the different forms. I'm going to write a listing for my house, and I'm not going to put it on the market. Then you can trash that. Please don't trash anything that where you started with an exclusive buyer brokerage agreement. Please don't trash that. Please don't trash any listing that you began filling out the information and you went on the listing appointment, but it didn't come to fruition for whatever reason, that you and the seller decided that it wasn't a good fit, because there are documents that you would have filled out. If no one has signed them, if there's nothing fully executed, if there's nothing executed, for example, by one party or even by yourself, you could potentially trash it, but you still would, I believe you would still want a history to see those things that you've worked on and see if there's other opportunities or ways to reach out to individuals who may have had a connection with before.
If you trash a file, can you take this back? Or?
No.
Mm.
If you trash a file, can you take this back? No. If you trash it, you trash it.
It's like my new Berlin file is dead.
Right.
And now it's going to be back to life. So.
Right. So Ed was saying, he had a file, it was a listing, it expired, and then now it's coming back to life. You'll see that there are categories that we place the folders in. For example, you'll create a folder, either a seller folder or a buyer folder. Once you start that folder, in other words, once you start to put documents in it and submit those documents to the checklist, then it notifies us, and then we move the transaction either to an active listing or an active buyer, pending buyer, something like that. Those will occur once a transaction or once a listing or a transaction falls apart. We can move the listing to expired or withdrawn, and then we can move the transaction to a dead transaction, and we put it within the year that it occurred. And that way we can always go back to that and then reactivate that file should the listing come back or should the transaction then become live again. So you don't want, that's another reason you don't want to go ahead and trash anything, because you never know when something may come back to fruition.
If you had an app file, like for example, from my old company, Century 21.
Right.
Yeah. You can't get into that, right? Even though they're my files and it's their files too.
Well, okay, so Ed's saying, if I was at another company using AppFiles and I had a listing maybe that was at that company, is there any way for me to access that listing? No, there's no way to access that listing because it really isn't yours. It's always been the brokerage.
But if I get audited,
you won't get audited. The company gets audited. The brokerage gets audited. So you could be attached to a file that's audited, but you won't get audited. The company, the brokerage, because remember,
that's what I was worried about.
All listings and all transactions belong to the brokerage. Could there be ramifications for something that you did in the transaction? Absolutely. But the brokerage is responsible for that also. So you would not be able to access a file. So for example, if I was at a previous brokerage who used AppFiles, I created a listing for a house on Powell Place, and that listing expired, and now I'm with a new brokerage, and that seller now wants to relist with me, I have to start the file over. I wouldn't be able to access that previous information. And you would probably, even if I'm at the same brokerage and I have a property that maybe expired and now we're going to give it 30 to 60 days and then relist it, I'm probably going to want to update most of the paperwork in there anyway. So it's a good point. Any questions on that? Go ahead.
Yes, I have another question. What happens if I am working with the buyer and I open the file for that buyer for that house because he already picked the house that he wants, but we start working on that one, but he decides not to move forward with that one. and he saw another house, and do I need to open another file for the other house, or just use the same file and change the address?
So, all right, so that's a great question. I'll get into it if I could put that in the parking lot for a minute. In other words, hold on to it because we're going to get to that. No, because I think it's a good point. The question, in case you didn't hear it, was if I've got a buyer and they're making an offer on a property and I've titled the file, the transaction file, with that name of that property, if that one falls through and we move to another property, do I have to create another file? The short answer is no, because you can change the file name.
Oh,
And because a buyer is going to be working potentially with multiple properties, there is a way to create sections within your folder so that you see the history of what that buyer has worked on.
oh,
So you want to keep one file for a buyer and one file for a listing property.
oh.
Okay, listing property, one file. So if I have a listing for Powell Place and I was working with the Montgomerys on Powell Place and they sold it, once that file moves on, and once that sale has occurred because it was a listing, if now the people who bought Powell Place want to work with me, the Smiths now want to work with me, that would be a new folder. I wouldn't go back to the listing.
Yeah, no.
Right. But if it's a buyer, I want to keep everything for that buyer for that transaction time in one place. But now if that buyer becomes a seller, then I would create a listing file, and whatever they buy would be a new buyer file. But just for that transaction time, for that buyer, I would create one file.
Okay.
I'll try and we'll kind of cover that again too.
Yeah, I always thought you'd have to have a new file because you have a new address. But now you said you can change.
Right.
Title.
We'll show you. Well, yeah, we'll kind of show you how that plays out. How that plays out. Let's see. So again, my app files. Your homepage is kind of here. You'll see that it's a highlighted tab. My app files would be all of your app files. So if you click on that, what will show would be any of the transactions that you're currently working on, or your history of transactions. Signature requests relate to what signature requests do you currently have in play, so that you can see what signatures have been done, what hasn't been done. Since we're working with, you're on my platform, you're going to see a couple of extra ones so that we can see what signatures are out there. Then your inbox would be any communication, email communication that comes into your inbox. You'll see that each folder has a history of communication that flows between or within that transaction. So you can see, you can always send emails to that transaction, which we really encourage you to do. When you're working within a transaction, if you're working with the listing and a potential buyer's agent sends you an email into your personal email, we recommend that you forward that to your AppFiles email. We'll show you how to do that, but you should keep all of your emails related to a specific transaction within your folder, within your transaction folder. This actually goes for texts also. While texts are not often allowable in court should we have a situation, we do encourage you to put copies of your texts in your email. So you would have to print them and then put them into your transaction folder, not to your email. Put text into your transaction folder.
I mean, in case you need them at this committee or something. Yeah.
Well, not only for that, I mean, if you have texts that are going back and forth between you and a seller, and the request via text is to reduce the property by $10,000, and you put together a modification to the listing agreement and they sign it, that's proof that they agreed to that $10,000 price reduction. But that text is your support to have put the modification together to the listing agreement. So it would not be it's not a bad thing to have those texts in there, not just for things we don't want to think about down the road, but for the good things. Well, you would have to print your text.
Oh, and then scan it.
Yeah. So actually, you could save your text into a PDF by taking a picture of it, transferring it to a PDF, and then emailing it from your phone right into your transaction folder. Any activity, this would be activity that's related to you on your platform. Checklists, if you want to create a checklist, this is kind of a nice thing. There are checklists in here that you can create for buying or selling. Those need to be updated, but they're a great structure or skeleton to use, and it can be also customized for things that you do as a checklist for going through a listing transaction or a purchase transaction.
Don't you already have that on that file?
You're talking, Ed said, don't we already have checklists? We have a checklist in the transaction folder that shows you what we expect. These are checklists that would be tasks that you do or that you perform for a listing, not a checklist for forms that we require or that we ask you to complete as part of checking your file. They're two different ones. Go ahead, Jessica.
Yes, so glad you just went over this tab. So that is a checklist that we could create specifically for how we go through the process of working with a seller or a buyer and all the things that we do in that transaction from start to finish. And we could create a checklist for that that checklist, could it be then used? Would it be like a checklist that could be used with different customers, or do you have to recreate the checklist? I know that might sound a little goofy, but once you create the checklist, can you use that same checklist for all your sellers, and then you have a buyer checklist for all your buyers? Do you see what I'm saying? Or do you have to recreate it for each individual file?
No, there are already some checklists in here, and you can use those or customize those, and they are checklist templates, so you can use them for any file.
Yay! Thank you.
Right. And then tasks would be tasks that you've either set up for yourself or that we're communicating on. I don't set up a lot of tasks. I check your files, and then I try and communicate with you via email through the system on what things we're missing or what things we need. I mentioned that a file follows a specific flow. So it may start as a buyer file, and then it may become a pending buyer. Or you might see pending buyer incomplete. If you see a pending buyer incomplete, what that's telling you is, I've looked at the file, I see that this buyer is under contract, but I need some additional information from you. I either need some forms that we're missing, or there's some items you may need to correct on your contract,
Signature.
or maybe you're missing some signatures or initials, or so when you see pending buyer or active listing incomplete or pending listing incomplete, whenever you see incomplete at the end of the file tag, it's telling you that I need something from you. I need some help from you. And usually what I'll do is try to communicate with you on that through email. Plus, in your folder, you'll see in the main screen when we get to one of the folders, I usually put notes in there as to what's needed or what I'm missing or what I'm looking for, so that you know what it is. In addition, when a file is incomplete, neither Teresa nor Audrey will sign off on a closing. Well, none of the three of us will not sign off on a closing disbursement or commission disbursement authorization, or a commission disbursement authorization, or the file itself for payment, so that we can, if you don't produce a form to get paid at closing and you just want us to pay you after the closing is done, we won't pay until we know that the file is complete, because we have to have all that information in case we get audited. Jessica, then Yasmin. Go ahead, Jessica.
Yes, so I've been in AppFiles for now over a year, and I just noticed that when you create a signature request for a customer, as soon as you create that signature request, that file changes colors into yellow and becomes incomplete, where I had never noticed that before until the other day. I'm like, oh, so when I create something for a customer to sign, that file goes incomplete. So that was, just a piece of information that was like, oh, okay, that's good to know.
It changes color, you're correct. We'll change the tag, but you're right that it becomes an incomplete file when there's a tag, when there's a signature out. So it's a good point. Thank you. And then Yasmin.
So when something is missing, you put like the file incomplete. But if I give you the information that you are looking for, you change that to complete, or
So
it's still there incomplete.
So for example, if it was a buyer and it was a pending buyer incomplete, and I was asking for a copy of the seller's disclosure executed by all parties, and that was the only thing that was missing, and then you submit that to the checklist, that tells me that you've submitted to the checklist. I check it to make sure that everything is there, and then yes, I would move it from pending buyer incomplete to pending buyer. And then where the note is that I said I was looking for seller's disclosure, I usually put my initials next to it to say that it was complete, so that you know that I've seen it too.
I got a
1
question
second.
about this.
Ed.
Or Jessica talking about changing colors. Like, let's say I'm asking for a signature.
Right.
When I'm filling it out, then when I go to put it where I want the signature, it's already yellow before I even get there. So do I have to still touch that line? And
So Ed's asking about putting signatures onto documents. If the document exists and the signature exists already, or the space for signature exists, and the form has been set up for signatures, the yellow box will already be there. Signature boxes will always be yellow. So the signature box will be there.
so I don't have to hit it.
You don't have to add it.
Okay.
However, if it's a form that's come from someone else, so in the example of using the seller's disclosure, I may have asked you for a seller's disclosure that shows your buyer signed it. Well, you got the seller's disclosure from the listing agent. So the system sees the seller's disclosure as a flat document. So now you would have to convert that document, which the system does for you, add a yellow signature box, have your customer sign it, and then it would come back signed. But without that signature box, they wouldn't be able to sign it. You would have to add that. That's kind of phase 2. We'll get into some of those different nuances as we get into some of the folders. Yes, Jessica.
Ed, I am so sorry. Let me clarify. So when I said that when you create a signature request, the file turns yellow, I meant the color of the folder. I wasn't clear. So the color of the background folder, sometimes gray, I think blue, and then yellow-ish. So when you create that signature request for that customer, the folder in the background turns yellow, and then it says incomplete. So I don't know if I may have confused, because you are right. The signature request boxes are yellow, but what I meant was when you submit that signature request to that customer for their signature, that background folder changes colors, and then it states incomplete file. I'm sorry.
No, it's good clarification.
Where does it turn you?
Well, let's get into the folders so you can see some of that. I mean, we're talking, since we've got people at all different levels with this, let's see if we can step back a minute. And now that we've got a little bit of the orientation of the main window, let's take a look at a couple of different folders. If I click back on home, you'll see that the screen changes back to the original screen with the tasks in the middle. I can search for any app file, so I can search for my app file. I can search by just putting a name in there, and any file that has Montgomery in it would come up. So you can see I've got a few files here that are with me. Here's the agent name right here, agent name here. Does it bring up others? Sure. But since I'm working in my folder, it's going to bring up stuff that I've done. Now I've got here's one from Haley. This is back in 2018. Those aren't going to show up for you on your folder, just your folder stuff. Excuse me, your platform items will show up for you. I can click on any of these. I can see that they were buyers. So buyer or seller, this means this is the file type when I set the file up. when there's a buyer controlled sale and what office and what year. So in yellow in 23, yellow or green, whichever this is. Is it yellow or green?
It's yellow.
Yellow.
Okay.
It's a yellow green.
It is a yellowish green.
So that indicates that this file was closed, right? So for this year, it's a darker blue. So that tells us that this closed. It could say buyer, pending buyer, incomplete. That's where it would tell me what the file type is. So I'm just going to pop into a couple folders so we can talk a little bit about, let's go ahead and actually create one. So if I'm in my platform, I'm going to create a new app file. And the first thing it's going to do is show me what looks like a folder. And this is where both Jessica and Ed were talking about, as you move through the folder, the background color changes color. So it starts out as this light yellow, and then I just have to put in some basic information. So I have to put in a file name. So what we ask is, if you could please, if you're working with a buyer, please start with B. If you're working with a buyer and you've just started working with them, we don't know really what property they're going to end up putting an offer on. We don't know what type of, we don't know if it's what all the details going to be of the property. I'm just going to go ahead and I may just put in Ben Montgomery, right? So now I've created a buyer file for Ben Montgomery. This is a buyer, and this is the person's name. Do I have an address? No, I don't have an address because I don't know the address. Don't know yet. So then I'm going to choose the file type. So the file type here is going to be buyer, but you'll see that there's the option for buyer new construction. So if we're only looking at new construction, I can check buyer new construction. Or I don't know, the buyer may do new construction, may not do new construction. I can always change the file type later. But here's the deal. On a buyer, if I start by doing buyer, no problem, buyer, and now I type the residential type and I'm like, look, I don't know. I don't know whether they're going to do single family. I don't know whether they're going to do condo. I don't know whether there's going to be an HOA. I can start with just single family. That can always be changed later too. But here's the deal. You have to change the residential sale type to ensure that the checklist that you're working with matches the type of property. We'll show you where that is. Agent name, you're just going to want to go ahead and put your agent name in there. Of course, I probably type your name better than I can type mine. And then when we're starting out, we're not going to know all these. Well, we may know the buyer name. And I'm going to type in Benjamin, because you'll see that there are places you can import information from other places to help you automatically fill out your forms. So you may want to go ahead and put how the buyer would like to see their name. Closing date, we don't know. MLS date, we don't know. I'm going to go ahead and pick the office as the San Jose office. And then we'll just go from there. If I want to put notes in here, I can absolutely do that. I met Mr. Montgomery at Starbucks. If I want to try to keep notes on for me for later, right? Once I've done that, that's all I have to do. And I can hit next. And this creates that option for me to say who else or who needs to be or have access to this. So it will always come up with your name as the required user, and then Audrey, Teresa, and myself will be in the recommended users. If at the onset of this transaction, I know that I'm going to be working with someone else in the company, I can choose their name from this list. So I can add Alex to this list if I want to, and then Alex would have access to this file. If I don't want to, I can remove Alex from the list. Maybe I'm going on vacation. I wouldn't set that up here. I can add someone to my file later if I ask someone to help me with my file while I'm on vacation or gone for a few days. I can do that later. This is at the onset. So at the onset, you probably just want to leave yourself unless you know that there's someone that you're working with in a team or a partnership, that kind of thing. I'm going to go ahead and create my app file. And when I do that, this is part of what both Ed and Jessica were talking about. You'll see that the background, when it all comes together, the background should be almost a yellowish. It's white. Maybe it moves to yellow later. Now it's kind of whitish. All right, so this is my main folder. Think about a folder that you put into a file drawer that's got the little tab up here, which is the name, tells the type, the file type. If I look through, I can see here are tools that help me work within my file. Here are additional tools so that I can add forms, I can scan a document, I can upload files. For example, I'm working with a buyer in this case. If I pulled a document down from MLS, like a homeowners association disclosure, a CDD disclosure, a seller's disclosure, condo docs, and I wanted to make sure that they were in the folder, in my transaction folder here, I can take those out of MLS, put them onto my computer, and upload them into this file so that I make sure that everything stays in one place. You'll see that in bluish right here, these are checklists. So when I start a file, a buyer file, I'm going to have a residential sales checklist for a single family home. That's because that's the way I set this folder up to start. If when the buyer gets to making an offer on a property, we find that it's a single family home, with an HOA, with a CDD pre-1978, all I have to do is come to the Manage Paperwork tab, click on Manage Paperwork. It will open up a window. I can see right here, here's my residential sales option. And if we've decided that we're making an offer on a house pre-1978, all I have to do is check single family pre-1978. And what it will do is it will change my checklist to ensure that the forms that I'm going to need for a home pre-1978 are going to include the lead-based paint brochure, the lead-based paint disclosure. So those are two that would not have been in a single family home. So when we get to the point that we have a specific property that we are making an offer on, or that we go under contract with, maybe that's a better way. When we go under contract with a specific property, I need to make sure that this file type matches the property that we're going under contract with.
Also, you don't have to change this in the previous, when you start creating this folder, you can change that from here.
Yes, right. So
So
if, for example, remember when I set up this buyer, initially we didn't know, is it going to be a home with an HOA? Is it going to be a home with a C? We're working together. It's single family. They've said, I'm interested in Jacksonville. So we haven't had the discussion about, are you interested in older homes? Are you interested in South Side homes? Are you interested in new construction? So we can change that at any point. We can change this file type here so that the checklist, and notice the checklist is gray. The checklist is gray because these aren't the forms. These aren't the forms in the file. These are forms, these are the reminders in the checklist of what you need to submit for a complete file. But I can change the file type using the Manage Paperwork. Jessica, you said you had your hand up and then you went away. Did we answer your question, or?
Just answered it with Manage Paperwork. Thank you very much.
Okay. You're welcome. All right. So this is your checklist, is where you'll submit things once they're fully executed. This is your activity form. The activity form is really important for us. Both Teresa and I track it, we watch it. It helps us manage our partnerships. It helps us understand where you are in the transaction. It helps us understand what the expectations are. It helps us for internal reporting. So we need that activity report filled out at the onset of your file, not just before you close. We need it at we need it at the beginning because it helps us with our reports. In the file here, we've also just got a recap of who the individual is. We've got file access, who can access it, Audrey, myself, and Teresa. Now here's where, if by chance I'm going to go on vacation and I would like to add someone to this file so they can work with it while I'm gone, I can go ahead and add a user right here. And there's Kay right at the top, so I'm just going to add Kay. Now you can see Kay is on the list. If Kay goes into her platform, Kay would have access to this file, right? So I've shared this information with Kay now, and she can now access the file at the same time. If after vacation, Kay did a couple of things and we have an agreement of how she's going to get compensated, and she says, just take me off the file, I'm getting too many messages on it, then I can just remove Kay from the file, right? So I can have someone there temporarily to help me out, or I can have someone that sticks in the file for an extended period of time to help me out, or that we work the transaction together.
But that file automatically goes to her app file?
It will be available on her platform. So when she pulls up AppFiles and she goes into My AppFiles, she will see Ben Montgomery, or she would have. So. Within the system, over here on the right-hand side, the AppFile tools, we encourage you to please send emails through AppFiles. So you can compose an email and send it to your customer, to another agent, right through here. You can copy this app file if you want to create a second app file, but remember, since this is a buyer, we would probably keep everything within the same format, within the same platform. We can archive a file. We can delete an app file, in other words, move it to trash. Again, please don't do that unless we're sure that there's not going to be anything we need.
Right.
So this is the copy, this file, app file is when I have another house to show the customer, or not submit the offer for another different house, or this is what I need to do, copy this file?
No. So you wouldn't
copy this file.
So you would copy this file, for example, if you would now, this was a buyer and it didn't come to fruition. They've done nothing, right? And now we've put that into an expired, or to we've elected to move this person into a past year. And now I want to copy that file, all that information, and create a new file for him, is when you would copy. We tend not to use copy because we want you to keep buyer stuff in buyer file, seller stuff in seller file. And if it was an expired or withdrawn, then you can move it back to active. But if it's one that closed, that needs to stay. So if I had a buyer that closed, so this was an investor, Mr. Montgomery is an investor. He closed on a property this month, and now next month, I'm going to do another transaction for him as an investor. I may copy that file with information, that file's information from the closed file, and put it as active now, and then change the property. But that other closed file would stay into the closed, under closed, because it's a separate transaction. You can link app files. This section here, it would probably stay within the platform itself as it is. Over here on the file information, this is a great way to ensure that fields, or that you have access for fields to auto-populate. So if I'm working with a buyer, I may edit the buyer information here, and I can put the buyer name. If there were a second buyer in here, I can use that second buyer email, but I can still put that second buyer's name right here. I can use the buyer email for buyer one.
How many buyers fit in there?
You can just keep returning. So the question was how many buyers I put in here. I can go ahead and put a third one here, and then I can add fields. So I can add a third. Oops, excuse me. I can add a third field in here. I can create a third field for the buyer 3 email, but I've got buyer 2 email here. I've got buyer email here. I can add a third. I can add a fourth.
Because they're all River Road would be fine.
Sure, you can add 5 different individuals here. But once I've got that, what this does is allows me to, one, have this information when I'm ready to request signatures. The email address will already be available. I won't have to type it in. I can choose it from a drop-down menu. Other information that I might need will be available. So for example, and again, there's no save. I can just close and you'll see that the information will appear over here on the right-hand side. Now I can use this as contact information. I can come here and get contact information. In the middle here is also a file mailbox. This is a unique email address for this folder. So I can copy this email address and send a document straight into here. So if I copy this email address and I go to my email, and I compose an email, I can just go ahead and put that email address in here and it will send a copy of this email straight into the file. So if I were sending an email outside of the file to Mr. Montgomery, I might be able to send it in there. Or if I've received something from Mr. Montgomery that I want to have go into this file, I can send it directly there by using this email address here, this link to this copy and paste into an email that I want to forward into here. Because all of my activity will appear, emails, communication, requesting for signatures or initials will all appear straight in here under recent activity. So that's a little bit about the layout of your folder. So here's where we have some challenges is when you're setting up a folder. So for example, if Mr. Montgomery is ready to make an offer, I'm going to want to choose a package of information or a package of forms that is applicable or is relatable to the property that we're making an offer on. So for example, when I go to add forms, which is where I can pick any form individually, a lot of you seem to be going straight to search for a form and you do as is. For example, the as is purchase and sale agreement or contract for purchase and sale. You'll see it shows up in a variety of different places because what you're seeing is this package contains that form. This package contains that form. So it's showing you the same form in all the different packages it's in. What you really want to do is you really want to come to select a forms package and use the drop-down menu to then select the package. So we've got all of these different packages already preset with forms. You can, some of them have 13, 12, 19, 17 forms. We've elected to go for a single family house pre-1978. So here's a purchase and sale agreement, single family, FHAVA pre-1978. That's not what we want. We want sale and purchase pack, single family post-1978. That's not what we want. Here's the sale and purchase pack, single family pre-1978. It has 15 forms in it. If I click on this package, you'll see it will bring up every single form that's in that package. I can select individually, but we recommend that you just select all and it will move every single form over to the right-hand side. Notice I've got available forms, selected forms. So I've taken this package, I've selected all of the forms that are in this package, and I've moved them over to the right so that I can now create a forms package within my transaction folder. Notice the first form is the activity form. 1, it's A. 2, it's the most important form we need, right? So when I hit add selected forms, what ends up happening is that it puts every form, all 15 of those forms into one package. Notice I've got 51 pages in my forms package. And here's where I realize that this can be a little overwhelming. I get a lot of agents who go, this is too much. There's too many. I can't. No, I don't need all of those right now. Just let me use the ones I want. Okay, here's what I'm going to ask. Bring the forms package in. Start filling out the information. When you're done, split out the forms that you don't need. Why go in that process? Because if I start the forms package with all of the forms that I need and I begin filling in the information, it will auto-populate every single form for me. So even after I split it out, if I need it later, it will already partially be filled out. So it's a time saver, even though it looks overwhelming. Is, oh my gosh, there's 51 pages. I don't need 51 pages. Okay, well, we understand that, but at some point you'll probably need all of these forms. If not, you may need the majority of them. Yes.
As I already fill out the file information for my customer, when I bring all these 50 forms, they comes with the information that I already put there in the file information customer.
No, so notice I don't have the information right here. See, the buyer name is not here, even though I put it over here. Okay, but I can import values.
Oh,
So I can import values from here. So my choices to import values would be from a specific form that I've already filled out, or from info fields that I've filled in, or from the MLS.
oh.
So I can import information from any of these locations.
Mm.
Right? So when you start this, the activity form is the first form. So, you want to fill in the information. If there was an MLS number, whatever it was, and then your app file number 8053. Where did I get that? Where did I get that? I got that right here from this number here, and it's 8063. So I got that right there. Okay, now maybe I closed my forms package to find out that number, and now I come back over to the left. There's my checklist, and I look down here, and there's my general paperwork, and I'm like, holy crap. I had a forms folder that had 51 forms in it, 51 pages of forms. How come I'm only seeing one thing?
Mm.
Because when you brought it over, the forms package gave the forms package the name of the very first form. Remember I said, notice what the first form is. So one of the first things you probably want to do is come back up here and with the blue pencil, just change this. So if Mr. Montgomery is making an offer on Oak Street, I may say Oak Street offer package. Now I know it has everything in it that I'm going to need to make an offer on Oak Street. Click the check mark, and now the forms package is more relatable and contains all the forms I need.
I gotta go.
Okay.
I gotta be.
Bye-bye.
I'll give you a call.
All right, so I'm going to say that, my name. I'm going to say the app file number. We're going to change that to 6 to match it. And then, is this a listing or a sale or a birthday? Yeah, birthday, no. It's a sale. And then I'm going to go ahead and put the property address in. So I might put in 1833 Oak Street, right? And Jacksonville, Florida, 32205. And I'll put in the buyer name. Now notice there's 2 spaces for buyer name. So if it's just one, I'm going to use the one on the left. If there were a second buyer, I might use this, I would then use the second box. If there's more, I would have to add them to this, plus I would have to add them to the forms itself. If there's a seller, we use Bonnie because she lives in that area. She owns a lot of stuff. We use even her middle initial. Okay, and then I can fill in the rest of the information. I'm probably gonna want to do Idella, Comcast. The more information you fill out, the better it is for you. So, all right. Is it an equity sale? This would be a traditional sale, or is it new construction? Was it a bank owned, or is it a short sale? Is it, what was the source of your business? Is this my sphere of influence? Is this, where is this business coming from? Not only does this help us track for you, but if you have a question about it, this is a great way to be able to track your information. So what was the listing price? You know, if it was, 550,000, great, then you would write that in. When did it list? Usually this is used just for your listings. However, the sales price would then be reflective of what you and the seller, or what your buyer and the seller were able to come under contract for. This is related to the binder, who it's being held with. If there's a cooperating associate name and company, that's what we would want there. If there's a referral, this would get filled in. And then the post-closing information, hopefully you can fill this in as you go, whether they're using conventional cash, whatever, and then what companies they used for lending, unless it was, of course, cash, home inspection, home warranty, that kind of thing, if it was there. Notice what it did was it started to fill in all of the information as I flow through the forms. And the forms came in order of name alphabetically. So notice the appraisal contingency is first. Why is the appraisal contingency in here? Because initially when I said that this is a single family home pre-1978, I didn't say whether or not this was cash. The as-is purchase and sale agreement does not contain a contingency on the appraisal. So we've put that form in there for you in case you need it. In case the customer is cash and would like to have an appraisal, or in case they're conventional and you want to make this contingent on the appraisal. If this were the pre-1978 FHA or VA package, the appraisal contingency would not be in there. The FHA VA addendum would be in there, which contains the appraisal contingency. Excuse me. I can see then that there's so was there a question? Then there's the FF form, which summarizes any monies that the seller is agreeing to pay the buyer and what those funds can be used for. And then there's GG, which if you're using GG, remember it places a contingency on the contract, but GG is also imperative to be used if a compensation agreement has not been executed. We're having a lot of difficulty, or not difficulty. There are a lot of sellers that are saying, you can tell an agent that calls that I'm willing to pay compensation, but please do not disclose the amount that I'm considering. We have sellers saying, don't tell them that I'm offering any compensation. Let them make an offer and include their compensation agreement. If a compensation agreement has not been executed, there's no legal standing for us as the buyer's brokerage to be compensated. The compensation agreement is a standalone contract between, in our case, the seller and the buyer's broker. It's rarely between the seller's broker and the buyer's broker. Our company policy is seller to buyer's broker. So if that compensation agreement doesn't exist, in other words, has not been executed, you need to add this addendum to your offer, which says, until a compensation agreement is executed, the buyer can back out. It's not just because we, the buyer's brokerage, want to have an assurance of being compensated. The other reason you need to ensure that there's a compensation agreement and all parties are aware of the compensation agreement is because A buyer's lender, if a buyer is using a lender, needs to know what the buyer's obligation will be in this contract. For example, if a buyer signed a 3% buyer brokerage agreement and the seller is willing to pay 2% or 2.5% to the buyer's broker, the liability for the buyer is 0.5%. The lender needs to know that because that impacts the buyer's ability to purchase. Now let's just make it less transparent and less clear. The compensation agreement is not to be referenced in the contract because it is not a document that is an agreement between a buyer and a seller. This is the other reason you want this addendum, is so that the buyer and seller are understanding that a compensation agreement needs to be executed between the seller and the buyer's broker, even if it's at zero, prior to the buyer being obligated to move forward in a contract, because the buyer has every right to understand what their financial obligations are before they fully commit to the contract. There's a lot of words. Anybody want to throw anything in there? Question?
I thought that was very well stated. I would like to probably rehear it a couple of times, so I'll go back to the YouTube channel.
Yeah.
Yeah. FF and GG are agreements between the buyer and the seller, and were created to create communication or to establish communication between the buyer and the seller as to what type of compensation is out there, how monies that a seller is providing to a buyer can be used, and to assure that the lender, the buyer, and all parties are aware. Because a compensation agreement cannot be put into a purchase and sale agreement or contract for sale and purchase, a buyer's broker agreement is not to be given to a seller, and nor should the seller be asking for it. Seller shouldn't care what the buyer and the buyer's broker have agreed to. It doesn't impact them. They need to make a decision, or the buyer and the seller need to negotiate the compensation amongst themselves. Here's what you'll see in an email that'll be coming out probably for the next couple of days, because we've learned a lot more about these two agreements. Is if your buyer, if the buyer would like to edify that or request compensation from the seller for their buyer's broker, please do not write into a contract for sale and purchase, seller to contribute 3% to buyer's broker. If you feel that it's necessary to put that in there, a statement in the contract for sale and purchase, please write it as buyer requests seller to pay 3% to buyer's broker. The reason is that creates the communication between the buyer and the seller, and doesn't leave the buyer out by saying seller to contribute 3% towards buyer's broker. So buyer requests seller contribute, or buyer requests seller compensate buyer's broker 3%. So that creates an element of negotiation, or an item that can potentially be negotiated. Now, where is that 3% edified? Between the seller and the buyer's broker, it's edified in the compensation agreement. It can also be edified in the contract using Form FF. That's really not the reason we were going through this, but since these forms are new, I want to take a few minutes to really kind of maybe provide some clarity to both of those, or either more confusion. I'm good with either one. And you can see we go down and the forms are still filled out. There's a lead-based paint disclosure because this is pre-1978. So everything is in here. If I'm confused about what forms are in here, all I have to do is come to the top. If I click on the tab Edit Pages, Edit Pages allows me to look at the order, the form, the order the forms are in, It allows me to split forms out. Again, please don't split forms out until you've completed filling in the information necessary, because that will put it on all contiguous documents. If I look here at change order, I can see right away exactly the forms that are in my forms package, all of them. If I don't like this order, that's fine. In other words, I want the as is contract for sale and purchase at the top. I just use my keypad or my mouse and click on the bars to the left of the form name and move that form around, move that form to where I want it to be. So I can see here now I've got my appraisal contingency, my credit related, my seller, my lead-based paint disclosure. I don't need the addendum to the contract right now, so I'm going to move it down. My compensation agreement, seller to buyer's broker. That's the one that we're going to use, so I don't need this one. I'm going to move it down. So it's at the end. I need to make sure the buyer has the energy efficiency brochure. I'm amazed, and I'll be the first to admit, I've been doing this since '95. And as many times as I read the NEFAR agreement, and now as many times as I've read the contract for sale and purchase for Florida, under paragraph 13 in the NEFAR, under the non-additional terms, under the, I can't remember the name of the paragraph, but I think it's paragraph 18 in the as is and in the residential, you have to give a copy of the energy efficiency brochure to all buyers. It's been required for years, and I think that a lot of us have forgotten about it. We do have to give the lead-based paint brochure to anybody buying the house before 1978. Here's the exclusive buyer brokerage agreement. Maybe I've already had that signed, which is great. Let's move that down. Maybe I've already had the multiple disclosure signed. Let's move that down. So I'm just moving down the things that I don't think I need. The home, if it's not in a nationally recognized historic district, doesn't need the historic disclosure. This is on Oak Street. We're going to say it's in Avondale, so let's say we need that. And then here are the other documents that I've just kind of moved around, including the repair and replacement. Yes, Miss Bonnie.
So the energy efficient brochure and whatever information for lead-based paint, we can send those as attachments, because I've saved them on my laptop forever, and I've always just sent them as an attachment. They don't have to be printed and handed to the buyer.
Yeah, they don't have to be printed and handed. You can send them via email. That's why we've included them in the package, so you can send them here also. The only thing we need to know is that you sent them to them. We have a lot of agents who don't want to send them, so they split these out before they send them to the buyer for signature of all of these other documents. And that's okay, as long as I can see that you sent it. So what I would recommend is, if you want to keep them on your personal computer and send them via email, please copy the AppFiles email address. And that way, when you send that email will also be copied into AppFiles. And then I can see that you sent those. When you submit each of those documents to the checklist, then I will know that you sent them, because I can see you sent them individually. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I mean, I've always had it that it's been, 10 years since I've handed a paper copy of it to somebody. I've always just sent it as an email attachment. This is the first time I thought maybe it shouldn't. But it's good.
No, you're correct. As long as they receive it, it can be email, it can be handed. I just need to know that you just have to submit it to the checklist, and then I look to see how did you get it to them.
Okay. All right, I'm going to go back on mute.
Okay. So now I've changed the order to where I'd like it, so I can go ahead and save those changes. Now, if I go back to edit fields, you'll see that the first thing there is the contract for sale and purchase, which may make more sense. The names are where the names should be, and the addresses, and then of course I can fill in all the information as I go down. As I fill in the information as I go down, purchase price, $550. It will tell me, hey, how are you? Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Sorry, the guest. Anyway, fill in the appropriate information all the way down. All right, so this is going to customize all of this paperwork. When I'm ready, now if I'm ready to send this to my customer for signatures, but I remember that there's already things that I don't want them to get because I've already done them. For example, I've already done the exclusive buyer broker agreement. I've already done the MDA, the multiple disclosure affidavit. All I have to do is come back to edit pages. And because this is still in forms sections, I can split forms out. I can come right into the package and go, well, I already sent them the multiple disclosure affidavit. They've already signed it. I'm just going to go ahead and send that back over to my folder. Now notice it says activity form. So this matches and mirrors the folder. The checklist, this is my residential sales checklist. And then there are folders below that. So here's my other folders, and here's the general paperwork folder that it says it's going to send it into. I could send it to sales documents, listing documents, dead offers, condo docs. I can send it to any of these places. I can put it into any of these sections, or I can create a new section. I would have to do that outside of splitting it, but I'm just going to go ahead and leave it as general paperwork. I'm going to go ahead and put my exclusive buyer broker agreement to general paperwork. And I'm going to go ahead and do this compensation agreement seller's broker because we're not going to use that one. And I'll go ahead and send those to the general paperwork. Now I split those forms out and get a message. And now if I check my form order, I can see that those are no longer in there. So they don't need to go to them. If I review this again and I go, oh, wait a minute. The addendum to the contract, the activity form, the repair replacement, the historic, those I don't need either. But I want those in a section that says Oak Street. I can close this and I can close my package and I can come down to my general paperwork, down into the, well, I have to be in my package, I'm sorry. I have to be in my Oak Street offer package. I can go ahead and create a new section right here by using the drop-down menu. Scroll down, and I can see all the way down at the bottom is new section. And I can create a new section, and I can call it Oak Street. And this is how I would do offers that don't get accepted and we move on to another property. I would put them in Oak Street deal fell through, or Oak Street dead offer, something like that. I create a new section for all of the paperwork that was related to that property, and then I keep that information in the buyers. Create a new section, Oak Street. My offer is in the Oak Street section, and come to my edit pages and my form order and break out, oops, excuse me, form, sorry, I apologize. I can set my form and come down and move all of these activity form. I can move it to Oak Street. I can take the addendum contract and move it to Oak Street. I can take the repair and replacement because I'm not going to use it till later. I can do the same thing with the historic disclosure, and I can split them out into that section, right? And I'm still back in my offer package. So now all I had to do was split out some forms. They're all now individually in my Oak Street section. My offer package is still here, and I'm ready to send it for initials and signatures. To do that, sorry, how are we okay with working through the package? I know it'll take going through one on your own, and please do create, an agent test package for the buyer, an agent test package for listings, because we've been focused on buyers right now. Yes.
Could you tell me again where do you go to create the new folder for the for that offer
To create,
for that documents? Yes, because I'm going to create another folder for another offer for another house. So where do you go to create that?
so to create
the
new
new-
sections,
The new section.
you would want to be in a form or in a forms package.
Yeah.
Use the drop-down menu for section.
Section.
The first section it shows you is the activity form section. The second section it shows you is the checklist. You don't submit anything to the checklist until it's executed. Then it shows you general sections that you can put forms in. And then there's the option to create a new section. So if I'm now going to write an offer on Powell Place, I can just write an offer. Powell Place, and now I can create that section also. Or since this is the Oak Street one, notice it's now in Powell Place. I want it back in Oak Street. I can use the section drop down to move it back to Oak Street.
Oh.
So you can create your own sections. Yes, ma'am, Jessica.
If Oak Street became a dead offer and we are now
Mhm.
making an offer on Powell Place, we would go back to the forms package after we create the Powell Place offer, and we could create that whole package again. Let's just say Powell Place is not single family home pre 1978, maybe Powell Place is HOA and CDD. We would go back to the forms package, select that package and put it into Powell Place, correct?
Correct. So let's step through what you were just saying. So let's say that Oak Street didn't work out. I'm over here. I've got my Oak Street section, right? Right here. Got my Oak Street section. So now I can go ahead and pull up a forms package. So let's say that we're going to make the offer on Powell Place, and Powell Place is actually a property with an HOA and CDD post 1978. I can pull up that package. I can take all of those forms, move them over. They're all here now. All the forms I need, including the HOA and CDD. Here's the HOA, and then here's the CDD. Okay, right there. You can add those forms. I can now come into here and create a new section that says Powell Place. Create that section. It's now in the Powell Place section, and I can change this to my Powell Place offer package. Check. And close that. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Now if I
thank
look
you.
down, I've got my Oak Street one, which notice there's a pencil to the right. I can now click on that pencil, come back to Oak Street and say dead offer. Save changes. And now I'm back into Powell Place package, ready to make my next offer. Okay. Does that make sense? Is that what you were asking, or did I misunderstand?
Yes, that was exactly perfect. Thank you.
why that form has different colors? It's yellow, blue, green, yellow. That means that they'll bring the information from another.
It's based on the type of field, whether it be an alpha field or an alphanumeric field, or the type of field that was created when the form was created. And yes, it can bring information in, just like we talked about from the import values. I'm going to go back to the Oak Street one, in case, unless anybody has a question that I'm missing. Anybody have a question? Just going to go back to this one because we'd already started to fill in some information. To send a request, all I have to do is click on request signature. And you'll notice it says if this is a single party, you can do one signature request. If it's two parties or more, you'll have to do a signature request for each party. Can more than one party use the same email address? Yes, more than one party can use the same email address, but you would have to send two separate requests, one for party one and one for party two. So notice the forms are down here. Here are your instructions, and then start a signature request. When you start a signature request, it moves you through these tabs as you make selections below. So the first thing I want to do is I want to put in the individual's name, the way that they would be signing their legal paperwork. Then as I scroll down on this first tab, I can see these are signature fields where I'm going to ask someone to sign. And these are initial fields. In other words, where I'm going to ask someone to initial. When I begin, based on all the forms, if I say, yes, I want the buyer to sign the as-is contract, I want them to sign the lead-based paint disclosure, I want them to sign the compensation agreement. Remember, we use the seller to buyer's broker. So the buyer's not signing that because it's between the seller and the buyer's broker. So I've selected for the buyer, I've selected the correct locations based on who this person is. If this person were Bonnie Brady, the seller, and I had that person's information because it was a birthday, or because the listing agent gave me and asked me to go ahead and send it to the seller for signature at the same time, I could do a signature request, a separate signature request for the seller. You can only request one signature and one set of initials at a time. Activate the initials. So if I say buyer initials, this means that the buyers are going to be asked to initial at the bottom of each page in the as-is residential contract for sale. On the appraisal contingency, the buyer is going to be asked to initial. On the FF addenda, they're going to be asked to initial. On the smaller, we'll do it. On the GG, they're going to be and this is one thing that happens, I think. A lot of us see this and we don't realize that we have to scroll up to ensure that all of the other necessary requests are made. So it automatically put buyer initials into these locations. But if I come down here and I want the compensation agreement, seller to buyer's broker initialed, this isn't where a buyer initials, so I don't have to add it. But there are sometimes forms where even though you select buyer initials, it doesn't select buyer initials on that form because it's trying to figure out, do you want the buyer to initial this before the seller does, or does the buyer have to wait until the seller initials? So for example, on a lead-based paint, if you didn't pull one down from MLS because the listing agent didn't put one in, but you're including it in the package that's going to the seller, you would not want your buyer to initial that until the seller has told the buyer whether there are additional reports, whether they've had the inspection, or what other information they have. You would want to wait until the seller has indicated their selections before your buyer. So you wouldn't select buyer initial, so the system may not set that up automatically for you. So in this case, we're good. We're going to go ahead and select next. The next step is there anything in these documents that the buyer has to fill in themselves? For example, do I want the buyer to type in their mailing address? If yes, and I require them to do that, then they will be asked to fill in their mailing address when they're filling out the forms, or the form will not be considered executed by that buyer until that mailing address is filled in. Most of the time, I'll fill these things in myself so that the buyer doesn't have additional things to fill in. But if you don't have the information readily available, you may want them to go ahead and fill in information themselves. Then there's the lead-based paint disclosure. If these aren't, it's identifying that these aren't checked, and that's probably because we don't know yet. So we're going to go ahead and wait on those. But this is the section that says the client is editing information in those documents. Do you want them to edit? Do you want them to have the ability to edit any of the information in these documents? And then next. And this is the form letter that will go to them that gives them the information on how to complete these forms. Now, I'm not going to use Mr. Montgomery's email address. I'm just going to use mine so that we can see how it looks. And then I'm going to go ahead and hit next. This is going to ask me who should know when this person has initialed and signed. It should be you. You'll be on the list. Should be you. Sometimes it's you and me. And if you're ready, then you can request signature. Once you've done that, you'll see that a new tab opens up and it says, I have an active signature request. If you scroll down, you can see that you have an active, or I have an active signature request from Mr. Montgomery. This is the email it's been sent to. This is when it was sent. The link has not been visited yet. What are we doing? Allowing signatures and initials. How many? We want 2 signatures and 19 initials. So it will keep track. So if this tab exists, that means the customer has missed something and you can see what it is. If by chance they say, I never got it, you can resend that signature request. If you realize that the email address you put in was incorrect, you can cancel the request and create a new signature request. So once that's out there and you've made that request, if you look down on the left-hand side, you'll see that there is a pencil next to Oak Street. And now Oak Street, we know that's out there for initials and signatures. To see what that looks like, I'm just going to pop over to my updates and hopefully that'll be there. There's the signature request for Benjamin Montgomery. So this is what a customer would see. You will also get an email that says that there's been a signature request. When I click on that, this is the standard email that comes out that was preset. And all I have to do is click on the link to be taken to requesting their signatures. And it tells them right away that there are 19 spots for them to initial and 2 places for them to sign. If they want to sign all at once, they would do initial all or sign all. If they want to go initial by initial, they would do next, and that would take them from one initial to the next, to the next, to the next, until they've completed it. Same thing with signatures. If they want to sign all at once, sign all. And then if they want to sign individually, sign next. If they want to go ahead and review this, they can download it so that they can either review it on their computer or print it and review it, or they can scroll through the entire document right in front of them. Notice it'll even show them where they're supposed to be initially. How would it look if we wanted to do initial all? If you wanted to initial all 19 at the same time, you can click on initial all. There are the terms and conditions related to e-signing. If the customer accepts those, they'll be brought to the next location, which says, I'm allowing you to go ahead and do all 19 at once. And then they can choose how they want their initials to look, by how they're going to initial and what they would like to initial, how they would like it to look. Click next. This is how it will look. If they're comfortable, they can accept that and then accept the initials being done all at the same time. Once it's done, you'll see that they've initialed in every location, bottom of every page, and all the necessary locations. If they were to do sign next, this is how it would work. They would click on sign next, and the program would take them to where the first signature place is. They can click on the yellow box, and then it would show their name as I put it into the request for signature. They can choose a different style if they would like. Next. Yes, I accept that's the way my signature will look. And now it will sign that location and take them back to the top where they can then choose to go to the next location and sign in the next location. So now once they've completed it, they have the option to go ahead and download their signed copy of it. You'll receive notification that they have signed and that it's completed. So the signature was completed, right? If I go back into the folder, let me go ahead and refresh the page. You'll see that down on the bottom, there's no longer a pencil next to the Oak Street offer package. I can open it up. I can then go through and see that they've initialed. And then if necessary, if there's any location that I need to initial or sign, for example, on the lead-based paint disclosure, I would have to sign. So here's the selling agent. Then I can go ahead and sign there. So I usually wait until the customer has signed before I sign, just in case I find something that's missing so I can resend it to them. But however your processes work, so I went back in and signed. Now I have an executed package, offer package to send. I can review in my offer package by clicking on the pages, looking at the forms. Oh, well, I really don't need to send the listing agent the energy efficiency brochure or the lead-based paint, right? So I can go ahead and split those forms out. All at one time, put them into that package, and then I'm ready to send this package directly to the listing agent, and I can send it via email right through the system. Once it's back, this is the next step. Once it's back, so let's say it's now been executed by the seller. We have a fully executed offer and contract. I need to submit the documents to my listing checklist, to my sales checklist. Now notice we still have our sales checklist at pre-1978. If I had wanted to change it to the Powell place, which was HOA and CDD, I would have done that through paperwork. I'm going to leave it the way that it is right now. I'm going to come down. I have my Oak Street information. Here's my lead-based paint brochure, which I've already sent to them. And I know that I did that because I can see it in the execution. So I need to submit that to my checklist. So now I go ahead and I submit that lead or energy efficiency brochure to my to my checklist. Now here's something that's going to be slightly different. Because I check your files, when I check your files, it puts a check mark next to it. If you had submitted this, it would have a blue hourglass right here. Once I accept it, you get the check mark. So that's going to be something different. When you submit, it's going to have a blue hourglass next to it. But to submit even straight out of my offer package, I can do that. So if this were fully executed, I can come to my edit pages. I can split my forms and I can submit the executed contract. I can submit it right to the ratified purchase contract. I can submit the appraisal addendum. If I look down the list, I don't see an appraisal addendum, so I can submit that straight to the checklist. I didn't have a preset one. The FF, I can submit straight to FF. If it's on the list, I can submit straight to it. Otherwise, I can submit straight to the checklist. The GG, if I look through my checklist, I don't see a GG. So I'm going to go ahead and submit it to the checklist. And notice I can do it all at once. I don't have to do it individually. Here's my lead-based paint disclosure. So I can do a lead-based paint disclosure straight to the checklist. And the compensation agreement straight to the checklist. Once I split those forms out and put them onto the checklist, in most cases, these would all be hourglasses. When they're an hourglass, when you submit to the checklist, it sends me an email, and then I know to go in and check your file and see what's there and what's not. If I accept everything, it puts a check mark like this, and then I would change the file to a pending buyer file. And you'd be good to go. If there was something that I saw that was missing, I would do it as a pending buyer, incomplete. There we go. And I would write in here something to the effect of flood disclosure. Or I would put in need seller's disclosure. And you can always tell what I'll be looking for based on the file that you have, because it will say here multiple disclosure affidavit. This is a company requirement. Do you have the buyer agency agreement? Required, required. Do you have a pre-qualification letter, escrow deposit once it's required? A copy of the private MLS listing, in other words, from MLS, the sheet that shows who the listing office and listing agent are, and you as the selling office, you as the selling agent and us as the selling office. A seller's disclosure or no seller's disclosure. Notice everything that's required is here. Activity form. If by chance there's a release of cancellation, for example, if in this case, in the example that we've kind of been following through, Oak Street falls apart, we would need you to submit that cancellation here. Why? Because then that lets us know that there's been a cancellation. We then take it off of our reports and move all of these forms to your Oak Street that offer section so that you can then submit all of the paperwork for Powell Place. Okay,
Clark,
yes.
so if you
Oh,
notice,
Jessica,
the background of that folder now is an orangey color. So because that's
yes.
I think it's, yes, incomplete. So that's the color that it changes to. It also changes that colors, and I'm not sure if because you're an admin user, but when you create that signature request, when you created that first signature request for your customer,
Huh?
typically that does change. As soon as you submit that request, the folder color will change. And see how it went back to, now it's green?
Mhm.
Yep. So that
Mm.
tool lets you know what's, I mean, if you're a color coordinated type person, what's going on in your file. Sometimes it can be a prompt, if you will.
Yeah, I don't pay any attention to that because I'm colorblind, so I don't see those color changes as well.
Yes.
But others of you who are able to see those color changes, it's a great point that'll help you understand where your file is in the process. And you'll notice if it were closed out, once all of your paperwork is in, and notice what happens is, sorry, when we went to pending buyer, your closing paperwork checklist showed up. And these are the things we would need for your app for closing. And then once it's closed, it goes to a buyer controlled sale for San Jose. So that would be that color. The background would be that color. Okay, we're coming up on noon, and I think I've probably given you enough to work with for a little bit. Jessica, did we answer your question on the template? On the master template, when the fields pre-populate, we did not answer that. Help me figure out where you were on that.
So, the buyer information that you created did pre-populate exactly how you had it. The master buyer template, maybe it's from filling it in a specific way that,
Talking here, okay.
right.
This has just got field in it.
So the master buyer
Available.
template, when you fill those fields in, yes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Sometimes the information that you have in these fields that you have up here on the screen, may not pull over everything, but maybe I've done something that I need to work on. I don't know.
Okay.
Because when you fill this master template in, it does seem to pre-populate over into your forms this information automatically.
Yeah, but I don't know if this is where you're going, but if I then have to add a form, so like I have to do it, and this is where we're also having confusion, is addenda and amendment are the same in Florida Realtor World. I know that they don't mean the same thing, but they're the same thing in the Florida Realtor World. So if I'm looking to amend, if I'm looking to amend the contract, for example, let's say that Mr. Montgomery is under contract for Oak Street and I want to amend the contract. If I look in amend, I don't find an amendment. It's an addendum to the contract. It's so hard to find. Addendum to contract. If I add that to my folder as an additional, form that I need, it doesn't auto-populate. unless I import fields, import values. I can import values from the fields. You know, I can import file information. I can import, it tells me if there's one value, one value. I can choose that and start that import. And it should import that information into here. If I had imported from imported values from a form, if I had done that from the residential sale and contract and choose that, it should put the seller information in there also. I don't need, yeah, look at the address and the names. And then it should fill it in for me so I don't have to type it in, if that's a help for you. I don't know if that answers
That does, well, yes, and
question.
it is correct. I must have skipped a step somewhere in there because what you're showing me now, it does look a little bit different than my process. So I will go back and review that and make sure I'm doing it correctly. Thank you.
This is why we're asking that you please start with a forms package. And even though it's overwhelming, the number of forms that might be in that package, if you'll please just start with the activity form, it will fill in all of your other forms and then break out the forms that you don't need and complete the rest of the forms and then send for signature when you get it back, remove forms that don't need to go to the other party. So I realize it's a lot of splitting in some cases, but it's not too difficult to split. And when you split, you can put the form wherever you need them. So hopefully that'll help a little bit.
This is it to split the type of information in every form.
The what?
It's easier to split the forms that type all the information in each
Right.
form.
Yeah.
What is the difference between the master buyer template and buyer information?
The buyer information is a more succinct, it's a shorter version of the master template.
Oh.
So if you see the buyer information, it has just these fields in it right now.
Oh,
If I look at the master template, the master template has a lot more fields in it.
oh, okay.
But, you know, under the buyer information template, buyer information, I can edit fields, I can organize the fields and move them around, I can remove fields. So I can add other labels if I want to, or change the way they look.
Mhm.
All right, so before, I just want to check in, do a quick check-in. Is everybody okay?
Yes, thank you very much.
Hopefully. Oh, yes, of course. Hopefully this will give you an introduction. Highly encourage you to, you know, create a new app file, and notice when you create a new app file, you have the choice under your file type to create, you know, an agent test file listing, an agent test file sales. Please don't hesitate to do that. Those you're welcome to move to trash. So we can work with that. Any other questions you guys want to throw out on the how-to if you've been using it for a while? Hopefully this gave you an introduction to using maybe some of the things that you haven't used or help.
Yeah, it is. They're all cool.
Sorry, what? And as you move forward, please try to email as much as you can into your folder. You can email out of your folder. When you email out of your folder to someone else, and this happens a lot because when I email you something, so if I say, if I'm looking at your purchase and sale agreement and I want to point out a couple of things that I think we maybe could either do better or to watch the next time or that I need assistance with, I'll send it to you through here so that it shows up in your email. And notice you can send it more than one. Oh, I'm sorry. You can send to more than one person. You can CC somebody. You can BCC somebody. And if I'm in the contract for sale and purchase or listing agreement or whatever form I'm in that I'm emailing out, if I want to add more attachments to this, in other words, I want to talk about a few different things, I can go ahead and click those other attachments and that will automatically add them to the email. So I can say, Teresa, please take a look at paragraph 18. We should not be putting compensation in this paragraph. Please add addenda GG or whatever. And then when I send that to you, after I send that to you, I'll usually try to come back in and put a note here, like we did with flood disclosure and seller's disclosure. We'll put those in there. But this grayed out list, if you see required next to it, it's going to be a form that we have to have. I need to add required to flood disclosure. So that'll be a form that we have to have. Questions for me? Please try and play in here. Please don't hesitate to call when you have a question or email me. Y'all are being so quiet, it's scary. Okay.
This was a great class. Thank you.
Good. Glad. I'm going to go ahead and stop the sharing and I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.